The following is the fifth episode of the Filip The Terran Podcast, where I interview my new friend, Joe Weber. Joe Weber is the founder and CEO of Fungi Mushrooms. They are a fungi-based nutritious company with a big focus, at least in the future, on agriculture of mushrooms. I really learned a lot from this podcast about the actual potential of fungi in general as a solution to poverty, as a solution to waste, as a solution to so many things that it will actually shock you. So I really highly recommend if you watch this podcast. I think there's a lot of potential in the area of sustainability of what we can do with fungi. And I really think that this was one of the most constructive podcast episodes yet. So once again, I apologize for any problems with connection and any time where I interrupted Joe, but I think that there's good progress on how I run these podcasts. And yeah, once again, thank you so much for bearing with me on this intro, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. Well, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. Maybe you can introduce yourself to the audience and tell us all about what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Joe Weber, and I'm the founder of 4-Star Mushrooms. We are a Chicago-based gourmet mushroom producer. And so we grow a variety of different mushrooms that we sell to restaurants, but our long-term goals are really focused on sustainability and really getting back to actually soil creation, ecosystem restoration, battling things like climate change, which I know obviously you're interested in. So that's kind of the long-term vision, which I'm sure we can really dive into.
And great. So you're very young, like myself, by the way, and you're the CEO and founder. So how did this happen? How did you get down this route and started this company?
Yeah, so it's obviously there's different levels of the story. So I guess it all kind of started when I was younger. I've always had this interest in ecology, ecological systems, ecological design, understanding habitats and biodiversity. And so that's been one of those things that, ever since I could remember, I was always interested in. I kind of carried that through into my studies. So I actually started studying landscape architecture because I had this idea that I wanted to, create ecosystems. And I thought that landscape architecture would be the best avenue into that. Either I thought it was going to be the best, or that was just the fastest or the easiest way for me to get into into a university. And so I studied landscape architecture for about a year and a half. And in that time, it was really great because it taught me a lot of skills that I didn't have before. But the main takeaway was that I wasn't learning enough science to really, that science was really what piqued my interest, understanding ecological communities and how those interacted. And so going into my junior year, I decided to switch into studying integrated biology, which, so I went to the University of Illinois in Champaign, and they have two biology programs. One of them is more focused on medicine. The other one's integrated biology, which is anything from medicine to ecology. And so that's the program that I went with a focus on ecology. And from there, I learned a lot. It was really interesting. I felt like I had a pretty solid understanding of ecosystems, how they work, and really the state of the world, which was kind of the catalyst for me really understanding and exploring the idea of controlled environment agriculture. So when I was taking this ecology course, and our professor was talking about climate change, and she's talking about the loss of biodiversity, and so many of these things tied back into monocrop and legacy agriculture practices. And so I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. So driving from Chicago to Champaign is about a 2-hour drive, and it's all corn and soybeans. And so that was pretty formative for me, driving through, and then also learning about what these were doing, what the inputs were doing, and how much soil we were losing each year. It was pretty formative for me in my understanding of the state of the world and what needed to get done to actually create a sustainable food and ecological system. So that whole educational experience kind of set me on track to get into controlled environment agriculture. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Obviously, like there's a lot of buzz around these like leafy green vertical farms and microgreen indoor farms. And so I kind of played around with that. I explored options with careers there, and nothing was really sticking. I mean, there were some opportunities, but there weren't too many opportunities for a recent graduate. So I was working for a solar company after I graduated, kind of just doing like, it wasn't passionate work by me. I mean, I'm interested in sustainability, obviously, so it was a good route for the time being, but I was just my wheels were kind of spinning. I knew that I wanted to do controlled environment ag, but I didn't really know how. And a little bit of background, I guess, is that I've got a history of entrepreneurs in my family. So my grandpa has started a business, which my uncle now runs, and my dad has started multiple businesses. So I've always kind of known that was going to be in my future. I've always wanted to run my own business, run my own company, and build something. And so that led to me actually listening to a podcast with Paul Stamets. Are you familiar?
I don't know him. I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah. So you should definitely look him up. He's kind of the main. I would say he's responsible for like getting most people interested in mycology and in mushrooms and medicinal mushrooms. And so I listened to a podcast, and it was my first time being introduced to him, and he just absolutely blew my mind for two main reasons. One, he explained what mushrooms do and what fungi do in the ecosystem, which is they're the grand recyclers. They break down material for the most part. I mean, the ones that we're growing, at least, they break down material and they make those nutrients available for other organisms, and they kind of perpetuate that cycle. And then they're also this ideal candidate for controlled environment agriculture because they've been grown indoors for thousands of years. They've been grown in caves for thousands of years. So it was kind of a light bulb moment for me where it's like, wow, like this is satisfying the ecological restoration passion that I have, and it's also supplying this idea of like starting a business that has the potential to be a high growth business in the controlled environment agriculture space and feeding a lot of people and like innovating in that infrastructure and technology to bring the controlled environment agriculture of mushrooms to further that from where it is now, because I think it's come a long way, but if you compare it to like the leafy greens, there's still a lot that we need to do in terms of like AI and automation. So that's the long-winded answer of how we got this started, and I started this in 2019.
2019. Well, you're making great progress. I have a couple of questions to ask you from what you were saying, which is very interesting for me to learn. So how do you define controlled environment agriculture exactly?
So I define it as just an indoor system that you manipulate whatever variables are important to your crop. So for mushrooms, we're really controlling, at least right now, I mean, there's a plethora of different variables you can control. Right now, what we're really controlling for is the amount of fresh air that we bring in, because mushrooms exhale CO2 and breathe in oxygen just like humans. And so we're controlling the amount of fresh air that we bring in, the temperature of that air, the relative humidity of that air, and then the lighting. And so those are kind of the four main things. And you can go down the rabbit hole. I mean, one thing that we're going to be hoping to explore next year and in 2023, or this year, I guess, and in 2023 is like adding things like pollen, different things that will trigger these mushrooms to act different. But yeah, that's how I would define controlled environment agriculture.
Okay, I see. And another question from what you were saying. So you were talking about how mushrooms are the recyclers of nature, right? And it's very interesting. So what materials can mushrooms break down? Um, can you let us know?
Yeah, so I'm sure that there is a wide range outside of what we do, but generally the mushrooms that break down dead or dying material are called saprophytes. So they're saprophytic mushrooms, and that's pretty much all we grow. Um, we're doing a little bit of cordyceps, which is actually a parasitic mushroom. It kind of the lines get blended a lot between them, but generally, uh, so the mushrooms that we grow are all grown on hardwood. So we grow on red oak pellets, and
Mhm.
so that's the carbon source, which they're really breaking down that carbon source, and then there's a nitrogen source on top of that, which leads to like larger fruiting bodies. Um, and I'm not sure if there's other things that the mushrooms break down that would actually create mushrooms, but fungi do break down. I mean, they'll break down anything, you know, mainly
Like
carbon based, I think, though.
mainly carbon based. So they can't be a solution for stuff like plastic. No? I think that's dreaming.
Actually, that's actually interesting because there's a lot of effort going into that in breaking down plastic. Um, I guess I do take that back. Um, it's,
Hmm.
they can oyster mushrooms can actually break down hydrocarbons. So
Wow.
in terms of like oil spills, oyster mushrooms are like a great candidate for that because they will break down the oil spill with the enzymes that they produce, and then they'll actually, depending on the species and the variety, they can uptake those heavy metals, those hydrocarbons, into their fruiting body, and then the fruiting bodies can be harvested and then disposed of. So it's like a really clean way to not only clean up oil spills, but clean up ecosystems and do like micro remediation.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
crazy. I had no idea mushrooms have so much potential. So
Oh yeah.
let me ask you a question, which hopefully will uncover that some more. So tell us more about four-star mushrooms. Like, what do you guys do specifically? What is your business model? And then why do you think four-star mushrooms is important relatively to the environment?
Sure. So our business model currently and over the past 2 years and going into 2022 is supplying high-end restaurants with gourmet mushrooms. And so our goal is to grow rare, unique, and nutrient dense mushrooms. And so that's something that is we're continually working at. Um, we're blessed to be in Chicago, which has like 26 Michelin star restaurants and multiple 2 and 3 star restaurants. And so our main customer base are these Michelin star restaurants. And then also like other fantastic establishments that they're not Michelin star rated, or maybe they just have different cuisine that isn't considered by Michelin. But right now, most of our sales goes to restaurants. Um, we do some farmers markets. We work with some specialty grocers, and in 2022 we plan to expand our farmers market offering substantially, offer increase the restaurants that we serve, and also start to dabble into some different spaces. So one of which being like functional mushrooms. So we grow reishi. We actually offer a mushroom extract, reishi mushroom extract, and so we've got that on our website right now. But we want to have reishi, lion's mane, cordyceps, turkey tail, have all of those both in tincture form and in powder, and then that kind of gets extrapolated out to adding value into like ground coffee or coffee beans, um, different like different ways to consume functional mushrooms, really. So the core competency of the business is and really always will be growing rare, unique, and nutrient dense mushrooms. And then after we have them, it's like, okay, these are going to go to restaurants, farmers markets, grocers, direct to consumer, functional mushrooms. Um, and we're also actually planning to do some prepared food items. So in 3 to 4 weeks, probably, we're going to have our first pop up. Um, we've got a chef on staff who we've been iterating on a fry. Actually, I won't divulge too much. Keep the people guessing. But we're gonna announce that pretty soon on what we're doing, because there's really a lot of opportunities in alternative meats or alternative proteins. Sorry, and I think that mushrooms are a lot more exciting than soy proteins or corn proteins. So that's kind of our business model. And then in terms of why 4-star mushrooms matters in terms of sustainability, our overarching goal really, and like my personal, because I'm the founder, it's really my personal goals and purposes are like kind of leading why we do what we do. We really want to restore ecosystems. And so like what we're really trying to do is we're trying to take these, because right now we grow our mushrooms on waste material. It's sawdust.
Wow.
And it's soybean hulls. Yeah.
Whoa.
So
wow.
We get them in pellet form, which is really nice, but we're essentially growing off soybean hulls and sawdust, which are both waste streams from agriculture and the lumber industry. And that's just because it's like, right, for our scale right now, it's easy to get those. They high yields. It just makes sense. But we can take a variety of different hardwoods and softwoods, different agricultural waste, things like cardboard, things like coffee grounds, and we can take those and what we're going to be doing is we're actually going to be training different varieties and different species of mushrooms to grow on different substrates. So when we see that, say there's like in January, like right now, right, there's a bunch of Christmas trees. People are just throwing their Christmas trees out. Next year, what we're going to be able to do is we're going to have, say we're growing 10 different varieties of mushrooms. We're going to be able to pull a handful of those. There'll be different variants of those species that are trained to break down different substrates. So what you do is you get it on a petri dish and you have some trace material of what your substrate is going to be down the line. And what that does is it teaches the mycelium what metabolites to excrete to start to break that down, or what enzymes.
Shit.
Yeah. So really the long-term goal is to take whatever waste stream we can get and process it. And while we're processing it, we're growing these amazing mushrooms, and then we're taking that what we call spent substrate. So after it's been processed, it's grown the mushrooms a couple of times, we take that substrate, then we'll take it off site onto our land and we'll use it in soil restoration and soil remediation. So we can take a plot of land that's got very, very low organic matter, and just by taking our waste and putting it on that land, coupled with different microbes and native seeds, we take that and we increase the soil organic matter and the biology in that soil, and we just shoot it to the ceiling. And so we're really like ecosystem creators in that sense in the future.
Wow. You're blowing my mind, frankly. I had no idea mushrooms are so insanely cool. So I want to dive deeper into this. I want to understand it better. What you're saying, like at least in my brain, has serious consequences in a really positive way as a solution for a lot of different things, clearly. So let's go. First of all, let me just say, so what you're doing right now in terms of 4-star mushrooms, you are selling right now mushrooms for food, basically to restaurants to kind of fund the business. And then you're starting to experiment with different things that you can do with mushrooms. And it just turns out that one of the most incredible things that you can do is you can remove waste, and then you can also restore habitats. So explain exactly how that works. Like, why does nobody care about functional mushrooms? Because this seems like a really big deal. Or maybe, in my world, I very rarely hear functional mushrooms as some kind of big solution. Can you dive deeper into that?
Yeah, and I think that that's just a problem of education. And there's also, people have their preconceived notions about mushrooms and about mold and fungi, and like it's kind of this weird other world that until you kind of get immersed in it, it can seem scary and it can seem dangerous, because a lot of times it is. In terms of functional mushrooms, I think that there's more literature coming out every month that's showing that this stuff is efficacious, and that like things like reishi actually can have an effect. I mean, I personally don't think that they're gonna replace like serious medicine like chemotherapy, but I think that they can be added in concert with, just similar to the way cannabis is. I think that it's like it can help a lot, and big time in preventative. If you have a regimen of taking functional mushrooms every day, I think that that's probably the best thing that you can do. You don't want to start taking it once you start to have issues necessarily. I mean, you probably do, but like that's not going to get you the result you're looking for. In terms of like what we can do with the ecosystem, I don't know. I think that, I mean, I'm kind of glad that people haven't totally caught on yet, because I feel like we still have a little bit of runway to actually get it done without a crazy amount of competition. But I think generally, like, it's hard for people to really grasp the idea of climate change and the idea of the loss of biodiversity that we're experiencing, the idea of the soil loss that we're experiencing. So like, people want to be green, right? Like, but they don't really know what that means. And so there's a handful of people. I mean, I'm closer to it, so like I'm connected with more people that are doing this, but there are people like there's actually a company right outside of Chicago that I'm friendly with, who they're breaking down roofing material, which is like a very toxic material that typically goes into the landfill, and they're breaking that down with oyster mushrooms. Yeah, and that's one of those things that's actually getting banned across the US and Canada. Like, they're like, you can't put any more of this into the landfill by 2025 or whatever. So I think that there's going to be some pressure from more progressive administrations about like really nailing down the details in what we can make, what we can't make, what we can throw out, what we can't. And I think that that's just going to make more opportunities and make more people aware of this. But I think generally, like, the reason that you don't hear about this that much is because it's hard to conceptualize what the problem really is. And then if you can't truly conceptualize what the problem is, then, I mean, how do you conceptualize the solutions, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And I kind of give credit to my ecology teacher for like being one of the first ones to really help me understand what the problems were. Because I've been thinking about this stuff for the past 8 years now, and it really just takes time.
Wow. Yeah, I'm extremely impressed, and I'm also very excited and feel more optimistic about the future. Actually, hearing these things, I think this is phenomenal. I had no idea mushrooms are so powerful. And I want to talk about a very specific subset of the functions of mushrooms now, and that is nutrition, right? So I think that we didn't talk about nutrition in detail yet. So what is your stance on, for example, when it comes to things like vegetarianism, veganism, land use, basically food relatively to climate change and sustainability, and how do you see fungi playing a part in that as maybe a competitor for plant-based? What do you think?
That's a great question. That's something that I definitely feel pretty strongly about. So I totally respect vegetarians, vegans. I understand their sentiment, and I understand that they want to make a change. And we do need to make a change. However, a lot of these plant-based meats, with the exceptions of the ones that are made in labs, I think, so like things that are soy derivative mainly, I don't really think that they're actually solving that many issues. I think that they're just reducing the amount of animals that we are producing and using, which might be a good thing. But at the same time, if we're just growing soybeans, like, you're still displacing animals, you're still killing animals. And like, I don't know if soy is that much healthier. I think that there's an argument to be made, which I'm probably not qualified to make, that soy, like plant-based or soy-based fake meats are not healthier than like even a commodity meat, let alone like a really high quality grass-fed beef. Like that's got like the amino acid profile. Like it's really good for you. It's really nutrient dense. I think what people are missing is the fact that like we're eating commodity beef, chicken, and pork, and we're eating it in complete excess. Like we don't need to eat this much. And like if you're eating it all the time and it's crap, yeah, it's going to be bad for human health. Like that's kind of a no-brainer. But that doesn't mean that like we need to make soy burgers, because I don't think that that's going to I don't think that's going to solve the problem. I think the problem is that we're like pigeonholed into creating really cheap beef, and like the system that we have is like, okay, grow grains and then ship them to where all the cows are and then feed the cows to make them fat. Like my vision for the future is having like restoring large tracts of land, like hundreds of millions of acres, to what it's. I'm mainly focused in North America, so like what it was in the 1400s, 1500s, like pre-European exploration, where there's tens of millions of bison and antelope and elk, and like one that creates a really, really strong ecosystem and a resilient ecosystem against climate change, and it actually sequesters carbon. Like we could take in all the carbon that we needed to just to reduce global warming's emissions and like keep them constant just by restoring grasslands. And so like if we can do that, like that's going to increase our resiliency in climate change. And it also has the potential, I mean, if there were 30 million bison whenever that was, like I think that we could probably, with today's technology, we could probably have more, and we could probably have healthier meat. So like my stance is like we just need to have better meat when it comes to the vegetarian, vegan versus people that eat meat. I think we just need to have better meat, and that comes down to better agriculture. Now, I think that there's definitely alternative proteins that we need to explore, because the world is getting richer. As the world gets richer, people eat more protein. That's just what happens. We're seeing that in China right now. And I think that lab grown meat is definitely, that's an option for sure. But I think mushrooms are probably the best option, because one, like I said before, we're growing this off waste material. So we're using a waste stream to grow a really high quality, high protein product. It's delicious. And like, we don't have to say it's like a plant-based or fungal-based burger. Like we can just say it's a mushroom, you know what I mean? Like, I think people are coming around to that, where it's like, yeah, it's a mushroom. Like it's not the slimy thing that you see at the grocery store that you had when you were 9 years old that you didn't like the texture of. Like they're so robust. Like a lion's mane mushroom is so different than a cremini mushroom, or like one of those little white button mushrooms. And like chicken of the woods mushroom is so different than those commodity mushrooms that like I think people are just starting to grow up and really understand that like mushrooms, at least I hope they are, that mushrooms are like a super viable alternative protein source.
Yeah, I've actually heard quite a lot years ago now that although, and this probably doesn't apply to all fungi, but this is mainly to like, what's the name of the main fungi that most people eat? What's the most popular mushroom that people eat? Because I just don't know.
Like the button mushroom?
Maybe the button mushroom, but this is something you... Yeah, champagne. Yeah, probably, right? So I've heard a lot of comments about the nutritious value of it. Although it is nice to eat I've heard comments that the nutritious value of it is very small. Is this, what do you think about this? Like, I obviously you know much better than me. Do you have any response to that? Have you ever heard this comment? I don't know how common it is. What do you think about this point?
Yeah, I don't know the specifics on it, but what I will say is that the nutrients that are in any sort of food are directly related to what that food is consuming. And so with mushrooms, it's the substrate. So I don't know what kind of substrate the commodity mushroom growers use, but that definitely has a direct impact on the nutrient density as well as the species. So there might be lower like nutrient uptake in a button mushroom that's bred for commodities because it's meant to be fast, high yields. So, I mean that definitely could be the case, but I don't know specifics on it, unfortunately.
But do you know any other fungi? Like, if you were to suggest some kind of families of fungi, right, that would be actual competitors to some of the foods that we eat, what food would they be competitors to, and what are the families?
So, like in terms of like mushrooms compared to like a meat.
For example, you can compare it to any food, but where could they fit into our diet where it would actually be good for the environment, for example, rather than just a random choice of eating mushroom rather than this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, so I think generally animal protein is always going to be more nutrient dense because it's higher in the trophic level. So that just means that like you're going to need to eat a lot more plants than you do cows because plants are primary. They're primary where they absorb the sunlight, and that's how they get most of their nutrients. Whereas animals eat plants and animals. So like, I don't know. I this also kind of just goes back to eating slightly less too. Like, I don't think that we need to be eating like these giant burgers twice a day. And that's where like you can have mushrooms as like your main meal. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think that they're great. Like I definitely believe in a balanced diet. So like having mushrooms, having vegetables, having meat, and the mushrooms can be a side, they can be a main. But I think that I think we're going to see a lot of innovation, and I hope that we're the ones doing the innovation in like understanding nutrient uptake and like nutrient density. So like for instance, this isn't about culinary mushrooms, but with like functional medicinal mushrooms, um, Paul Stamets was actually talking about how they compared the like antiviral properties of a certain mushroom extract when it was grown on X wood, and then which they just had, and then like, but they had foraged this mushroom off of say like an aspen, and they grew it then on an aspen, and like the antiviral properties from the first one were like 10 to 1 or however you measure that, and then off of the substrate which the mushroom was used to, so essentially trained on because it had been growing on that for years and years, it was 1,000 to 1. So like you can see how there's like I mean they're intelligent organisms, you know, like when they are grown on the right substrate in the right conditions and harvested at the right time, I think that there's tremendous opportunity to increase that. And you know, we might not get to what like a grass-fed ribeye is,
Mm-hmm.
but we can get a lot better than we're doing right now. Another thing that I think definitely affects this is what I was going to say actually back on the button mushroom, and this is the same for apples actually. So the average age of a supermarket apple, at least in the U.S., is 14 months, I believe, the last time I checked. So, and polyphenols are really what give the apple a lot of its nutrient density, and like those go immediately. You know, once they're in cold storage, you're not preserving a lot of those polyphenols, and I think the same is true with mushrooms. So, like, if it is a commodity mushroom that's picked and then it spends 2 weeks in transit and storage, naturally you're going to lose a lot of those nutrient benefits. And so that's why it makes so much sense to either have a really, really short supply chain and buy local, or to, like, what we're trying to do is, yes, we're that local producer, but we're also trying to make this available to everybody. And so building your own supply chain where, you know, we can guarantee a harvest to delivery within like however many miles, within 24 hours, because we can control our environments. So we know that right when it's picked, the truck is backing up and it gets put in the truck, you know? So I think that there's a lot of innovation to be had there as well.
And this is one of the most important points of all of what you're doing. And also what you started talking about at the start about controlled environmental agriculture. I think, tell me about the value that there is in producing fungi when you think about how easy it is to actually produce them compared to, let's say, a cow, or let's say even like a cropland, because obviously they used to grow in caves. Like I knew that also. Is it possible in any climate in the world to produce fungi at scale?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
100%.
Wow.
The thing, there's absolutely challenges. So like, obviously we use a lot of water. One of the greatest parts about our business, I believe, is that we are directly located next to Lake Michigan, and we have essentially an unlimited supply of fresh water. So if you're talking about Utah or Nevada or Arizona, where it's super dry and it's super hot, where we're trying to get cool, humid temperatures and using a lot of water, there's going to be a lot different costs associated with doing this in different areas. But in terms of like creating a robust system, I don't think it's actually been done yet. I know plenty of people that have tried to take the shipping. So for a lot of like leafy greens, there's a model of shipping containers that people use to grow them. And there's actually there's a great company who I'm friends with. They're called Freight to Plate. They're also in Chicago, and they grow leafy greens and lettuces and that kind of stuff, kale, in a shipping container. And like their internal environment is always constant. But with mushrooms, we're dealing with so much air exchange, so much fresh oxygen that's coming into the growing environment, that there are substantial expenses that come with that. So if you're in a really, really dry and hot area, it's challenging. If you're in a really hot and humid area, that's challenging, but it absolutely is possible. It's just a matter of dollars at a certain point.
Do you think mushrooms could be a solution to world poverty?
To world poverty?
Or let's say world hunger, to be more specific.
Yeah, I think world hunger, for sure. Yeah, with the poverty question, I would say that there's other like economic and political influences that go into that I'm not necessarily well versed in. But I think with hunger, like if you have a waste stream and then you have access to the means of growing a mushroom, like there's so many mushrooms, you can grow so many mushrooms off of a very small amount of waste.
Under your bed also.
Yeah. So it's the what we use to record that actually is called biological efficiency. So like the amount of dry material that goes into the formula that you're growing mushrooms on versus the amount of mushrooms that you get out of that. And like you can, if you're really trying to, you can get 2x the amount of mushrooms off of 1x dry material. So I mean, it all comes down to being set up correctly and having the infrastructure to actually do it and the supply chain. But I think it's definitely feasible, probably along with other things, you know, along with some animal agriculture and some vegetable cultivation.
It's really incredible because, you know, one of the biggest risks of climate change in my eyes is the reduction of agricultural output within the southern hemisphere of the world, right? So just with a very small increase of like 1 to 2 centigrade, you could see agricultural output decreases of between 5 to even 50% in the poorest areas of the world, right? So
Hmm.
that's projected to cause a pretty major refugee climate crisis. And the one thing that those people are going to be looking for, the reason why they're leaving where they actually live, is food, right? So if I think that it will be really up to people, like ourselves, to create systems to be able to support those people and be able to support a lot more people in terms of food. I mean, so I think this is a very eye-opening conversation, when it comes to that, as in terms of like fungi. Like nobody ever talks about fungi and how fungi could be applied to, to world hunger and all of these different problems. So I have another question for you. One more question, actually two more, and then we can finish up. So first of all, fungi and pesticides. A lot of people are very worried about pesticides and they're very worried about GMOs, right?
Hmm.
For reasons, I don't want to generalize, but I think most people don't know, for example, the chemical makeup of a pesticide, what actually happens with the GMO. So a lot of this, I do feel like it's face value opinions, because I'm telling
Hmm.
you, most people that have these opinions don't actually are not experts in either pesticides or GMOs. But
Hmm.
with that in mind, you have to appeal to the consumer. How do you talk about the subject, and how does that? Do you have any pesticides that you have to use? Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so we don't. Um, and really, like, we haven't gotten an organic certification or anything like that. And that's mainly because our market has been restaurants. And when you go into the back of the house and you meet with the chef and you bring them a beautiful case of mushrooms, they're sold. They know where it's coming from. They know that it's local. So that really hasn't been an issue for us. However, I do understand that like when we start to go into more retailers and we start to expand our production that way, um, I think having that organic certification and you know the little V, the no pesticides, like having all the check marks, I think is just good business, just to show like we're not. This is a clean product. This is you don't have to worry about this. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, thankfully we haven't had to do that yet, just because it comes with some red tape and it can be kind of costly. But I agree with you. Like people don't really understand what GMOs are, um, and like GMOs aren't necessarily bad. They
Mm-hmm.
can be fantastic. They just people tend to think about Monsanto and the super corn and whatever.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I mean, like all the food we eat is basically GMO just over the long term, right? Rather than
Absolutely,
doing the GMO in the lab, it's just being done GMO over like decades of like selective breeding, which is the exact same process.
exactly,
We just have actually less control over selective breeding than we do over like in the lab GMO, which is bizarre. It's kind of like the opposite of what people think is actually happening. But yeah, I do feel like, especially when it comes to what you're doing, explaining science to the average consumer. And it's not that to say that these people are not capable of being very knowledgeable about many topics, but science is complicated. And actually, you need to learn quite a lot of biology and chemistry before you can even start to understand all the stuff that you were telling me about at a deeper level in terms of how the mushrooms work. How do you communicate,
hmm
and do you communicate in a scientific way to your customers right now? And how do you see that as a thing you have to solve going forward?
yeah. I try to. I mean, I don't. I don't know the most about it, so like I try to keep it as basic as possible, because I understand that they know less than I do. And so I mean, I think every opportunity when people are asking about mushrooms is an opportunity to teach them and for their knowledge base to grow. And then if we can do a good job, just like what you're doing here, like if we can do a good job in explaining these concepts in maybe not in layman's terms, but in some way where people can understand them and then relate to them, and then take that and feel confident enough to go talk with people and like share these ideas. I think that that's the biggest thing, because I mean, you've got a podcast, so you've got reach. I don't really have that reach as much necessarily, so each individual interaction is super meaningful. So I mean, I try to explain all these concepts as best I can and really try to punch through on the fact of like what we were talking about earlier with like helping people start to visualize the problem that we're in and the solution that we can find, the solutions that we can find to get us out of it, and how buying mushrooms from us is helping in that solution. Because most people will, the best that they can really do to be green is to vote with their dollar and to support companies that are on these missions for sustainability and for trying to solve climate change and ecological restoration. Like, most people aren't going to be the ones that are actually doing that. So the companies and the platforms that we have that are trying to do that are extremely reliant on these folks. So I think just any opportunity to explain that to them and get them comfortable with these concepts, the better.
Amazing. So final question, what is the future of 4-Star Mushroom? Yeah. What can we expect in the coming year?
In the coming year?
Coming years.
Okay, so I'll tell you that in 2022, we are planning a new facility. The new facility is going to give us kind of unmatched control over our environments and really allow us to manipulate those environments and grow rare, unique, and nutrient-dense mushrooms. We're really excited about that. I mean, I built 2 grow rooms now, and I've learned so much over the past 2.5 years that, like, I'm very confident in our new design and starting to implement some artificial intelligence and machine learning into the process, so we can really start to build data sets and learn how these mushrooms grow and how that relates to their nutrient density. So that's 2022 is going to be really focused on scaling, getting us to, tens of thousands of pounds produced per month. And beyond that, I mean, just working towards achieving our goals in ecosystem restoration. So we're really hoping, and we'll get to the point where we're taking this spent substrate and we're inoculating it with native plant seeds, with different soil microbes, and like creating these really rich biodiverse soils, and actually like really producing soils, because that's going to be the currency of the future. Getting into regenerative agriculture. And I mean, my BHAG, my big, hairy, audacious goal is to have millions and millions of bison on these restored grasslands across the U.S., which is pulling carbon in and reducing the effects of climate change, reducing food insecurity, and generally just making a better place to live, I think.
Amazing, and I hope we can do this together. Like, part of the work that we do at Tree Nation is reforesting the world. We actually also plant trees in America. So I think we're both really moving to the same goal, and I really wish you the very best of luck, Joe. I hope we'll get to do this again. I learned so much about mushrooms, and now I hide them. I hold them in such a higher regard now after this conversation. It's really phenomenal. But yeah, so look, it's been a pleasure, Joe. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing all this knowledge with us. I really wish you and 4-Star Mushrooms the best of luck, man.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for inviting me on here and giving me a platform to talk about our vision and my company. So I would love to do it again anytime, and I hope to collaborate again in the future.
Brilliant. See you later, Joe. Have a great evening. Or day, I guess. You're in America.
Yeah, it's 1 o'clock here.
Yeah, here it's 8, right?
Well, have a good night.
Ciao, Joe.